Well, good morning. I'm delighted today to be able to welcome back Henry Tillman, founder and editor of China Investment Research and from Grayson's Peak Services, to talk about some research that he has been conducting with some colleagues into Bangladesh. And this is not the first time Henry's been with us, and sure he'll be with us on other occasions. I'm Mike Wardle. I'm chairing the session today. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the ZN Group. My job is really to get out of the way very quickly. A couple of housekeeping notes. First of all, the session is being recorded. Second, there'll be question time at the end, and please do use the dashboard available in GoToWebinar to pose your questions and put them in at any time during the presentation. We are delighted that we are sponsored to do these series of webinars by a whole range of people who support us being able to range far and wide over the subjects of technology, innovation, finance, and bring those all together. The program today is very simple. I'll get out of the way in a moment. We'll have a presentation from Henry Tillman, and there'll be time for Q&A towards the end. So without further ado, really, to introduce Henry. Henry, as I mentioned, is founder and editor of China Investment Research, but is really focused on doing research into trade and investment flows between countries. Most recently, he has been sort of spreading the net across Asia and has done a deep dive into Bangladesh, which he'll be talking about this morning. Henry, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for your time on an August day. I'd like to start with maybe 3 or 4 comments before we start flipping through pages. Number one, this idea started with a discussion I had with DIT, the UK government, in 2019, and then with a series of meetings with Bangladesh cabinet when they came through London in 2021. And it really came because Larry Summers had said to them during a capital raise that the story needs to get out because it's a great story. So we picked that up and said that we would write the next piece for this, and we do copy Harvard on this so that the Bangladesh people know we do follow instructions. This is a joint project with ourselves and something called Asia Investment Research. It's our joint partnership with a firm with 28 countries based in Hong Kong, run by Chris Devonshire. Well, and so this was a joint effort for them. They're much more on the linkages and the practicalities of investing in Bangladesh. We're much more on micro data. The data is fresh as of Q1 22. It was published in May, so there are several series of updates today, which we talk about, which are not written down, we had on the slides. And finally, it's quite timely in the recent Bangladesh news regarding China, ADB, financing, etc. So with those highlights, maybe I turn, Peter, can you next page, please? Thank you. I think you all know about the famous Kissinger quip in 1771 and the World Bank corruption challenge, which I'll talk about when we get into infrastructure. But recently, you can see how Bangladesh has performed so well at GDP growth, even during pandemic year. Despite the strong growth, FDI has not really come up like it should have done. In addition, there are pressures to their RMG business, their ready-made garment business, through Vietnam, and questions on the competitiveness overall as ranked by the World Economic Forum, 105 out of 141. So they still have a long way to go. That said, they've made a lot of progress. Next page, please. We're going to focus throughout this short document on showing balance, because it drives me mad to see one versus the other, either US or China or whatever. And you'll see throughout the document how Bangladesh has balanced its inbound flows across different asset classes or even debt. So here we have, these are international investments into Bangladesh. I don't need to show you all this, but 2 from Japan, which has been a leader, smaller from Korea, smaller from China, and one even smaller from Europe. So this sort of reflects the actual flows as the years, years over the years, basically. I would add more recently that China has made comments in the last few months about putting a sizable amount of money into a Chinese SEZ in Bangladesh in the near future. That would change the weighting slightly. But again, balance. Next page, please. In keeping with my comment about Japan being the leader, this is here are three. By the way, we look on each of our projects, the things we do is real numbers over the near term, not something longer term. But we try to address this up for investors to see real progress made, either 21, 22, or soon thereafter. So it's not some long distance buy. It's really for credibility for near-term investors. On this page, we note three Japan finance projects of the six they agreed before. You'll see they're sizable. One's an airport expansion, one's a rapid transit development, one's a coal fire plant. And look at the note below. These three and the other three, as part of this package, represent 27 billion worth of financing assistance to Bangladesh through 2021 by Japan. So Japan has been the leader in actually delivering infrastructure financing to Japan. Maybe take one step back. I didn't put in here self-financed. It's Padma Bridge. I guess you could turn the next page because it is some, if you will, maybe next page, please, Peter. Thank you. Separate before we go into these, Padma Bridge was the thing I alluded to previously in the 2014 area. In 2012, the World Bank said they would finance the Padma Bridge, which is a very important bridge in Trans-Asian railway, basically. And in 2014, they pulled that financing and said we were not going to do this from corruption. So Sheikha, the Sheikha who runs the country, decided that she would, Hashina decided she would challenge that and said we could do this financing on our own. It's clearly it's Chinese production, but it's their individual financing. And that was on 2015. She started that project on 31st December last year. She and her sister walked across the bridge, which is just slightly smaller than the bridge going to Stockholm, sorry, Sweden. So it's sizable. And that bridge opened, was launched this summer in June, 3 months after it was supposed to be started. So she basically effectively challenged the World Bank and pulled it off. So we were quite impressed with that, and it shows how they're serious about making things happen. So that was not China financed, it was China built. Here we have just some sprinkling of deals. There's a $1.2 billion deal here for this for a processing zone, and you see the various different infrastructure things associated with this here, as for the digitization or infrastructure build out. But draw your attention to the box at the bottom. So we saw so far that Japan has put 27 billion of infrastructure financing into Bangladesh. So far, China has only financed 7.8 billion of this 27 deals they plan to finance. So they did propose 24 billion of financing in 2016, but so far only 8 billion of that's been done. And once it's all financed, it will just put them on a base on par with Japan in terms of balanced financing for infrastructure for Bangladesh. Again, well done for Bangladesh for balancing. Next page, please. This is important. I don't, there's too many words. I'm so sorry for this. But if you just look at the first bullet point, the point is for nearly a decade. It took a decade to do this. And if you look at the second line in that bullet point, it's a 4-lane, 48-kilometer highway to increase flows between the port and other regions of Dhaka. In the second bullet point, I draw your attention to the second line, which is a PPP basis, the first for a roadway in Bangladesh. On the last bullet point, we want to draw your attention to the fact that once it's completed, it's a trade route that completes, the Shanagan port, which is where, which obviously is one of the major ports into India, Northeast states, as well as Bangladesh ports in India, with and this is according to the ADB. So it took 1 decade to do this. It took a consortium several times to recut this to finally get it done, but it's on course now for launch. I'm not sure when the exact date is. It's 24, 25. So a major infrastructure project which did get done, but took a lot of time. Next slide, please. Bangladesh has been a recipient of multilateral loans. I don't want to spend too much time on this page because we could go to the next page, but just highlight high level of the 2021 loans. 80% were COVID related and the remaining 20% infrastructure related. So could we just turn it to the next page, please? Again, balance. So there's an AIIB loan. By the way, for those that don't know, it's AIIB's 26% controlled by China. That's all 100 now 100 plus countries investing in it. The second loan is also a COVID loan, which is AIIB. Then you see the third one, social development, ADB. Then you see a partnership on the next loan for AIIB and ADB split 50-50. Then you see the recovery loans, Korea, ADB, and AIIB. And then you see going down, you see also a 347 loan from JICA and ADB. So you see this, again, a balance across different multilateral players, a balance clearly, well, the focus was clearly to get emergency assistance to Bangladesh during COVID, but more importantly, many of these loans were actually to local domestic central banks for central banks to then refund that, recircle that business, recycle that into SMEs. Next page, please. This we like to show because it's a really strong message for those countries, and hopefully some of those countries are on this webinar today. If you look at the four, this is volume flows. This is not actual numbers, not volume of transactions. But number 10 in 2018 actually had 2 M&A investments, and those were led by China as early players, and they were sizable. And small amounts, therefore, in 19 and 20, you see a huge change in 2021, and that was driven really by, and there was, by the way, in 2020, there was actually one of those was a Series A called ShopUp, which was funded by VEON, a major telecommunications company. If you look at the delta going into 2021, that's really been driven by something called Startup Bangladesh, which is a 65 million fund designed to finance 11 different Bangladesh startups. And there's a second fund called BD Ventures, which has funded also 4 startups. So that's 15 of that delta and change. Again, action by the Bangladesh government to address, if you will, startups and seed capital. Next page, please. And you see how it primed the pump. You'll see the actual, not only the numbers, how it's changed. You clearly Q1 was led by the government flows, but as the year went along, it became much less government and much more international investors. Ending the year in Q4 with a big play from SoftBank, which we could show you on the next slide. Thank you. Next slide, please. I apologize, too much text again, but this is for a different presentation. So I just want to show you, if you look down on the 1411, you'll see the SoftBank. That's a 250, a 20% stake in what we believe will be the first unicorn in Bangladesh and soon to come to market. We're surprised it's not at market yet. If you look farther down, you see one Series B on the left-hand side towards the bottom. Yes, but most of these are seed or pre-seed. Or accelerator. They're very early days yet. So an angel. So there's still a long ways to go before to get these, if you will, to the stock market, which is a very important point of how to grow the market going forward. There have been 2 M&A transactions also in Q4. So it is developing. Volume has increased, but still it's still early days yet in terms of relative to an Indonesia or a Vietnam, if you will, development. Next page, please, Peter. So it is attracting active investors and venture capital from around the world. So it first started really attracting capital from Singapore. And you see the Bangladesh is number 3, number 2 and number 3, the local Bangladesh funds. But you see the IFCs now in it, Prosus out of South Africa, and Netherlands is in it, Sequoia's in it, Peter Thiel's in it. Leon Ventures is the one who led the shop up in 2020. Golden Gate Ventures from Singapore. So it's broadened a great deal from where it was just 2018, 2019. And there is in here Falcon Network in here from UAE. I'm going to leave that for a question later on, but there are now increasing links for geopolitical reasons between South Asia and the UAE. But I'll leave that for the time being and move to the next page. Peter, thank you. The Dhaka Stock Exchange volume and amounts, you can see how it's improved, and both the numbers have improved and the amounts have improved over the past 5 years, and on an increasing basis outside of the 2018 spike. And if you turn the page, I can show you some of the reasons why. Next page, please. So again, apologies for the small font, but if you go to the right-hand side, look under oversubscription, the second column from the right. You see 24 times oversubscribed, 29 times oversubscribed, etc. That's strong retail demand. So what did they do to help fix that? If you see in the middle of December in 2021, they put in a 15% management stake or company employee stake with a 2-year lockup. Yes, quite sophisticated. It was taken, but they put that in. In addition, you'll note the time between open date and consent date has been shrunk to 2 months versus several months previously. And as July 22 this year, I think it was early this month, actually in August, Professor Shibley has shrunk it to 2 weeks. Notice from the time you want to go, the time we let you go to IPO. That's to increase volume. The next thing, quite clever, is if you look on the left-hand side in the industry, you'll see banking, insurance, life insurance, etc. Those were all IPOs, not by choice. The finance minister came pretty clear and said, look, if you don't IPO and raise some capital, then we're going to look closely at your charter. And what they in fact have done is built an institutional management business from that. So in essence, they can then support institutional funds because, as you see on the oversubscription, it's heavily retail at this point in time. And with a little more communication, like what we're doing for the country is with institutional investors to show the positives in the stock market of the institutions as well, not just their local financial institutions. Next page, please. Despite all that, there's still a whole lot to do, basically. So you have the turnovers increased, as you see last year. It's done very, very well last year, but it needs to continue to increase. By the way, the stock exchange valuations also increased. I think the returns the last 2 years are 2 of the top in Asia, and I think the returns to shareholders have also been extremely well. I don't have the numbers in this document, but it's been a great story. Despite all this, as you can see, the size of the IPOs are still quite small. There's only 6 companies with market caps over $1 billion. That doubled in 2021. It's still a small number. That needs to get much bigger for other reasons, which we'll come on to later. We believe, we've had this discussion with management, we think the Caspy's IPO in Kazakhstan and Ozone in Russia, back when Russia was part of all of this, were actually outstanding IPOs that raised the bar and raised global awareness both in Kazakhstan and in Russia to technology. We think Bcash and some others have the possibility of doing the same thing. So we agree with many of the people that have stated before us that there's it could be tech-led as the way to drive the company forward, the country forward, and also the stock exchange forward. But again, you saw the VTEC, as you saw The venture capital side, much of that's still early days, angel, seed, pre-seed. So you have to ride the success of some of these, which we think will happen pretty soon. And again, I believe Bcash is one of the first to go public. There is no corporate bond market really yet. There is a perpetual bond market. They did very well for banks and financials and perpetual bonds last year, so that's a start. There really is no derivatives market, so they have to spend some time, if you will, building that as well. But again, they've come such a long way, and for now, it's still to come, basically. Which then leads us to the next page, which is the challenges they're still facing. I hope someone from Japan's on this call. We were left in a difficult position because we had to come down and say, look, all these things are great, but there's still inbound FDI issues. And I point to a story that really was led by Japan, the ambassador. There was a complaint that I think this was Q4 2020, where Japan raised over 20 objections as the reasons why, not objections, but areas where Bangladesh could help flow into the country and therefore also out of the country. And he met with Sheikh directly and said, can you help with this? And so I think the number was that by December of last year, that's really four, almost 5 full quarters, only 4 of the 20 hurdles had been removed. So there is this built-in thinking that's there for a while. It takes a while to change, and Japan again made that point for us, because it's very difficult to make the point from an outside perspective. But that little story itself there, and of course you've seen on one of the original pages, one of the key investments going in is a pledge for $1 billion from Japan. So this is quite important to that FDI. The second is, it's obvious they have to move to, as does the world, and something for renewable energy. So for rooftop solar, you could do all that, but for much bigger projects, which involve wind, et cetera, you need much more land, and there's a scarcity of land. So in essence, Bangladesh has 170 million people, 180 million people, in the size of the state of, I think, either Montana or Wyoming. So there's not a whole lot of spare land, basically. Which is also a services constraint. Of course, the water, the water levels in the land are also service a constraint. And then another one is a private equity expansion. There has been one fund formed in 2009. CDC from the UK had a fund they launched in 2015, and there's been really no major private equity plays in the country since then. Contrast that with Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, where there's been a considerable private equity play and expansion. It's just not been developed here yet into Bangladesh. I think, and the last thing is basically outbound flow. There really is, the outbound flow last year was for the whole country was $15 million US was permitted to leave the country, I think, with 3 or 4 major companies of the 6. We mentioned over $1 billion, and that was really to put growth capital into expansion capital into the existing businesses. It wasn't entering any new businesses. In addition, it also wasn't there wasn't any venture capital or if you will, non-strategic capital permitted to leave. And we believe that some of these big companies, now 13, I think over $1 billion, need to have the right, if you will, to invest externally, and that's got to happen somewhere down the road. And I think that's enough to cover. It's a lot of material in a short period of time, but it does at least say, last page, please, Peter. So this is me. I used this for 25 years. I've always said thank you in red to like all Chinese presentations, to Eurasian presentations, but I've since been converted that to remind people that what you see there and the most important things about this is health. And by the way, in health, Bangladesh has chosen to be one of the hubs to manufacture Chinese vaccines and distribute Chinese vaccines with a local manufacturer. And of course, green, that we mentioned before, with as fast as they can possibly convert to green, are doing so. So thank you very much, all. I'm happy to answer any questions. I hope you got something new out of this. Mike?
Well, thank you so much, Henry. Fascinating insight into a market that I suspect many of us didn't have much knowledge about. So we're going to go into questions and discussion. Please, if you have questions, put them into the chat box on your dashboard on the GoToWebinar system. But I was going to start off by talking about what's driving, I guess, the investment in Bangladesh, and it may be similar to other parts of the region. Is this strategic positioning by companies wanting to secure their supply lines, or is this national governments positioning themselves in the region, do you think?
It's both. I think, as I believe there's a strong affinity, if you will, from South Asia headed into the MENA region, in particular UAE. I could see that happening, and we've already seen flows from the UAE into here. We've seen them also into Pakistan. Yes, we've also seen them in India. So we see UAE outbound, and we see tech, if you will, in many cases here, just like we're seeing with Israel now, being built in the UAE. So there's a lot of flow in and out of MENA into South Asia. There's a lot of flow in and out of MENA to every place these days, actually, into Southeast Asia as well. So there's many moving parts. But I think I want to go back to what we were saying all through this, which is it's a balanced approach. Yes, it's all these countries, and UAE and MENA are all part of, one of the top 5 investors in this thing. Maybe I forgot one piece I wanted to say before, if you permit me to jump around a bit. There was a criticism in today's Times or yesterday, or Financial Times or yesterday's, about a debt trap again with Bangladesh, just for everyone's purposes. I did give you aggregate amounts, but just for facts, China represents 6% of Bangladesh's debt. So I hardly call that a debt trap. But anyway, I just wanted to clarify, because most newspapers won't clarify that. Thanks for permitting me to do that. Sorry.
That's fine. The next question, I guess, is around the role of trade, I guess, in driving sort of these flows of investment. Reading the report that you produced, there's an awful lot of manufacturing investment going in from Japan into new manufacturing. And is international trade really one of the things that is driving all this?
Absolutely. I mean, as you see, it is Japanese manufacturing. Yes, it's Korean manufacturing. I'd say that's East. We talked about it from South Asia down. We haven't talked about it from East Asia coming in, but yet definitely it's East Asia coming into this market, and as East Asia is coming into many of these Asian markets. Yes, it is a trend, and it is manufacturing led, and they have to do this because basically that RMG segment they used to dominate is now gradually shrinking and moving to Vietnam. So you need to embrace the technology of again. I haven't seen Chinese manufacturing yet so much in. I've seen Chinese infrastructure. I've seen some Chinese corporate investments, but not big corporate investments. It's really been East Asia, Japan, and Korea leading this investments. Good question.
Super. Peter McBeath has asked about the fine-tuning of design of investments, as well as maximizing the business linked. Is the fine-tuning done to link those business investments to wider environmental benefits? Is it that level of sophistication in terms of the approach?
At a planning, I would say that's a good question. At a planning level, it's linked. Operationally, there are layers in there that don't quite know how to link it all together, and that's one of the challenges. But up at the highest level, I mean, Minister Salman is incredibly sophisticated. He's the wealthiest man in the country. He's really number 2 to the Sheikha, and he's extremely knowledgeable. And Shibley, Professor Shibley, who's the chairman of the SEC, is also highly sophisticated. As you see, the way they restructured the stock exchange. So yes, they get it. And Shibley's company, I'm sorry, and someone's companies are also in players in healthcare and wind. So yes, they're aligned. But as you know, in many countries or even companies, there could be a gap between where you're going and where the team has to get you to. So I think that's where they focus right now. But these are fully switched on. I mean, Larry Summers wouldn't say it's a great story to get out if he thought there was any kind of someone out of line at the top, basically.
I guess a good question. The thing that comes from this is there's very little US or European investment flowing on the figures you've done today. And do you have any advice to people in US and Western Europe about seizing taking of the opportunities that are provided by places such as Bangladesh?
Well, I can't top Pink Floyd's response about reading the other day, but I can say grab a map. Sorry, those of you who haven't read the Pink Floyd story, that's about Taiwan and China. Anyway, where he told CNN to basically read, basically. But I would say the U.S. actually was a major player for years. It still ranks probably number 5 in terms, and was manufacturing. It was technology, and indeed, General Petraeus, who ran the CIA, actually is a lead investor in one of those healthcare startups. So General Petraeus and the CIA certainly know where Bangladesh is. I think some of the other companies aren't so sophisticated to look at this. And I think it's much more of an Asia tech play, Middle East tech play, and more of an East Asia manufacturing play.
Mm-hmm.
I see the world, unfortunately, moving towards Asia, and the other part of the world that doesn't quite move with it.
Yes, I think that's a general issue. I think about where money flows at the moment. You mentioned the UAE. I wonder if you could expand a bit more about how the Middle Eastern countries and the UAE in particular kind of fit into the future of investment in Bangladesh and the region.
Well, it's bigger than that, as you know. So maybe I just introduced a concept you're going to talk about a little bit later in the year called the Abraham Accords. If you look about how fast that was really led by the USA government, and with all due respect to Kushner and Trump, to get this started. So we've seen billions of flows since Q4 2020, initially involving Israel, UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco, and now we see, it's not going to be long before Egypt joins this, and it won't be long before Saudi joins this. And of course, because of all the flows we track, as you say, we've actually seen a huge shift from Saudi and UAE into Southeast Asia, Malaysia and Indonesia. I think the number's over 20 billion pledged into Indonesia. So we can see this wealth, and I think there's now a discussion about linking by rail the Gulf through Israel into Turkey. So ultimately, the ultimate winner out of all this could in fact be Istanbul, with the east-west link and the north-south link. Yes,
sure.
So it's quite interesting how this is all moving. So while the world is warring with its whatever, other parts of the world are moving rapidly towards the new world.
And mentioning Istanbul, I mean, they themselves are now financing infrastructure development in their neighbours, particularly in Central Asia. And you can imagine that continuing, and different trade routes opening up as infrastructure develops.
It's quite exciting, actually. And those that get it are moving expeditiously. Those that don't get it are just not going to get it, unfortunately.
Well, I think we may have exhausted the questions from the audience. I guess the last one from me. Where next? Having done Bangladesh so thoroughly, and it's an excellent report, I'd recommend people online to go and find it. There's a link in the chat. But where's next on your list of countries to investigate?
Thank you. So with our partner of Asia Investment Research, we're looking at the following countries with this level of detail. By the way, the document itself is 64 pages when you put all the other stuff around it. Next is Malaysia, which should be done by the end of September, and we're doing that also in part with the UK government, because as you know, there's been a very strong link between the UK government and Malaysia Investment Link for 60 years plus. So that'll have a UK into it as well, but the same level of detail in each of these different areas. Also in the queue are Thailand and Vietnam for the same reasons with the UK historical government. Yep, the same level of detail, and see what we could do more, because there's a concern, I think, within, this is public knowledge, as you've seen from Liz Truss, there's a concern that in many of those Commonwealth countries, the UK has been very slow, and by moving slow, they've been overrun by faster movers from East Asia, basically, and also from the Gulf. Yes, and then ultimately we want to get to Pakistan, because I think that's one of the most exciting. And UAE was one of the first movers in Pakistan. Yes, so, and then we'd have to talk about Saudi, because Saudi's not too far behind. Yes, as I say, it's very, very, so we have these queued up over a period of time, probably quarterly, once a quarter, because they're a lot of work. And I guess, thank you for asking the question. What we do different is we do micro data, so that everybody else, HSBC knows what we're doing, and so does Stan Chart, because they make a lot of money out of bank loans, if you will, into Bangladesh. So we go much lower. We'll go into below FDI levels or micro data to track where those VC programs are, and then also who's in those syndicates funding it. Yes, and ultimately how that gets into stock exchanges, to track all that, how you're really drawing investors around the world in the smaller places first. So we'd like to start at that granular level there, and that just takes a whole lot more time than normally FDI, which you get from pretty much everyone. And by the way, we didn't realize, but apparently rating agencies do not go below FDI level. So it was really interesting to tell Bangladesh that of this data we have, which is below FDI level, is actually value add to rating agencies who are not used to getting it. It's too difficult to find. So we're careful how many times we do this and for whom. Thank you for the question.
Well, it sounds like we'll be having you back in another quarter to talk about Malaysia potentially. And there's been a fascinating insight into what's going on in terms of shifts in investment. And I think just to emphasize the point you made, Henry, that finding a balanced approach in terms of where the investment's coming from into a country's economy is vital. So I'd just like to finish by thanking once again our sponsors. We really are delighted that we're able to run these series of webinars, which are as fascinating as the one we've had this morning from Henry. So thank you very much for that. Looking forward to future events. We're still going strong in August with events on an information commissioner, on trust in AI, a presentation from Seoul, from Invest Seoul on Friday morning, and then Tuesday next week, anthropology and technology. Do go to the website, sign up for those that you want, and remember that all of our webinars are recorded and are available on our channels, so you can go back and investigate previous events. So final thank you to Henry. We found, of course, on webinars you can't open the floor for audience reaction at the end of one of these things, so you have to make do, Henry, with a very small amount of applause.
Thank you.
From me, that was a fascinating presentation. Many thanks indeed for taking the time this morning.
Thank you very much. As always, you guys are fantastic. All the best. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for the time for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.